Dan from Hootsuite. Super excited to have Dan here. I've actually been a Hootsuite user since Hootsuite was very, very first introduced. So I'm super excited to be sitting on a stage with him. I kind of have a little fan thing going on. But really excited to have you here, and I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about how Hootsuite got started.
Sure. So about 3 years ago, actually, Hootsuite was founded by our parent agency, parent company, which was an agency, Invoke Media, to serve then a need that seems obvious today, having a tool to enable a team of people to manage, multiple social properties. In that case, we were an agency, so it was our clients' social properties, as well as schedule, messaging, as well as to actually track clicks and tweets and seeing what's happening in that world. So spun out in 2009, December, and I've been running as an independent since then. And we've got 3 million plus users, reached that milestone in February, if I remember correctly, of this year. So we're pretty excited. That's where we are.
And I think one of the interesting things of the tools in general in social media is that, like the consumers have evolved and brands have evolved, the tools are also evolving really rapidly. We're looking at new data points all the time that we can begin to integrate. So really quick, I just wanted to kind of visit this idea of the evolution of the social consumer. So if you want to kind of walk us through this.
So I'd say I find I'm part of it myself. Actually, I was evolved as a consumer from being impacted by media in print and TV you've mentioned, but now I've become conditioned to reach out to a brand via social. I've actually a good little story where I actually was on hold with my cable provider because I was having issues with my internet connection, and found out that I was actually 15 minutes away from them hanging up the phone because they were going to close soon. So I sent them a tweet because I wasn't sure, I'm on hold, am I still going to be served? And they responded actually right away. And through a couple of exchanges that way, I was actually able to get the problem resolved. So people have definitely evolved as consumers from being able to impact them with advertising, but now the brand has to become smarter. They've got to find different ways to engage with your consumer because they've become conditioned to social, right? They've got peers out there that are using social to ultimately influence their social circles, if you will, and their friends and followers. So I think it's interesting, definitely, to see how the consumer has changed.
Yeah, and I think, as you look at this growth, right, at first you were just kind of getting online and you got on a Facebook, you put your page up, and then you added some photos and you talked to your friends a little, but then you sort of started commenting on their photos and you started participating in the community. And eventually you started finding things of value, and I think Tabitha talked about value to the consumer, right? You look at the Koji truck example, right? They found out they could find tacos. So off they went on Twitter to find places they could find tacos, and they didn't care that they had to wait 3 hours in line for some tacos. They went. And they sort of embraced that idea that they could find value in these mediums and that brands and companies could provide them with this value. And I think now where we're at is this really interesting place of influence. Now they think they can affect change. And we saw this with Egypt and what happened in Egypt as a movement. People really spread the word actively. They got the word out there. But you see it every day. I mean, Ford is a great example of a brand where they talked to their consumers through the whole debacle of going to the government and asking for money. They were open and they said, we're going to talk to you. We're not going to ask for money, but we're going to talk to you. Alan Mulally answered questions via Twitter the entire way, driving a hybrid car to Washington, D.C. Huge move for them. 35% increase in sales. Number 2 brand now, but last year, number 1 in the U.S. So they saw a huge growth and return from that. And as this consumer has evolved, their expectation has evolved. But I think that the brands have evolved too. And so you want to kind of talk a little bit to how the brands changed?
Yeah, I mean, the brands have reacted to this. They're definitely realizing that the consumers change. They're finding ways to change. I think a good example is Procter & Gamble. Everyone knows the Old Spice guy. They've come up with a really creative way to get people to look at them differently and engage with them. I think it was about 2 years ago, they even had the ability where you could go and have your own P&G, your own Old Spice guy ad created. You could enter some data. I don't know if anyone else played with that. So I mean, that was really cool because it was different. It was fringe, right? And The problem with that one, I think around 2 years ago, there wasn't a lot of analytics that they could really capture, but they had millions of views, and it was done on a shoestring budget. We all know what they've done now. They've allocated a lot of their money to digital, moving forward, and social, for 2012. So that goes to show that the brands are evolving now too, and they're definitely starting to get involved in different spaces. And I'd say that the social analysis is what's next, right? They're really starting to figure out how to monetize it.
And I think P&G is a good, Old Spice is a good example, but they also have big budgets. So what do you do if you don't have the budget that P&G has for Old Spice? And I think you kind of follow the same curve, as we've talked about earlier, that you're looking at first you're kind of going, okay, we put up this page, and here it is, come and post on our page. And then you go, oh, okay, we need to think about the numbers of this page. So we're going to look at the number of fans and the number of followers. Well, that tells you some information, but it's not the whole picture, right? And I think then you get to a place like the consumer where you participate. You realize, oh, there's a community there. I can participate. I can be part of this community. And you start looking at things like clicks on links. What do they click on? What don't they click on? When are good days? When are bad days? Maybe even look at what time of day you're posting. Does it make a difference? Does it not make a difference? You start to think about those things, and you start to kind of get to this place. And all brands can do that. And I think one of the things that's great about what's happening in the tool set is that there are tools like Hootsuite who offer basic things that have a little bit of analytics that you can start to learn. There's tools like Social Mention. It's like Google for social, and you can get some data out of that. So you can start at a place that's very accessible as you begin to work into, crawl, walk, run, right? So as you work into that, you can kind of build and flow. And I think the interesting thing we're at today is learn, right? Now we want to learn. We want to learn what we can learn, and we want to learn as much as we can. So one of the things that Hootsuite has, and other tools have this as well, is this idea of tracking key topics. So that could be different trailers. It could be different DLCs, it could be different brands. You can track all different things and pit them against each other, right? So you can start to look at how do those things trend, how do they flow, how do they look in opposition to each other. So you can look at two games compared to each other, so you can obviously look at your competition and what they're doing, but then you can look at the independent pieces of your game and how that changes. And it's built into the analytics tool, correct?
Yeah, amongst other things, you can see in the bottom left there's responsiveness as well. So now that you're getting other teams engaged, that generally we found social starts more in the marketing realm, but you're starting to get customer service folks involved. So you want those sort of metrics around their responsiveness and how quickly they're closing cases, that sort of stuff too. So we've built in those analytics, and it's becoming the ability for different teams to prove their ROI, that they're using social for their purposes as well. So from a marketing perspective, that's important, and from a sales perspective, from a customer service perspective, it's all going to be wrapped up into analytics and proving that.
And I think before we talked about, maybe it took days to respond to somebody before, and I think responsiveness speaks to, being able to look at all of the issues coming in. We're very fortunate to have a big team on the ground, so we can say, someone can't play a game, that's like tier 1 critical issue, we've got to fix that, right? So we can prioritize that and make sure that we respond as fast as humanly possible. Maybe we're working on it. We don't quite have a solution yet, but we're here. And we want to know what you're playing on and where you're located at. And we're collecting all the information we can get. We're absolutely, check our blog. We're absolutely going to post when there's updates. And then we also know, because of the numbers that we pull in, how valid some of the things are. So Xbox servers are down. Well, if there's 5 posts that say that, they're probably not down, because when they go down, there are thousands of posts by the second that come in. So, being able to know the vocal minority, we talked about that, being able to understand and put a number to that and say, okay, our executive was on the forum and saw this really nasty thread, and we can say, yes, but in actuality, that thread is only that large because it's been there a certain amount of time, and here's where it's being dealt with. So we are very ingrained in the community, so we understand what responsiveness is about. And I think the care and attention to responsiveness is what has brands winning right now, and has people saying, I'm going to fly Virgin, or I'm going to fly JetBlue, or I'm going to go here because I can talk to those people and I feel connected. And then the other big piece, I think, for us is understanding sentiment. So understanding how much is positive, negative, and neutral. And if anyone ever tells you over the phone that measuring sentiment is easy, do not listen. It is not easy. In fact, in gaming, it's probably harder than in any other space because any automatic sentiment tool that grades sentiment automatically will things like, that's sick, right? That ass. Those are going to be graded as negative every single time. So, we hand grade every post that comes in. It's time-consuming work, but the data, and I think Kat and Tabitha would agree, is valuable. The data, understanding how positive your community is, how negative it is really, really impactful. And then understanding the share of the voice that you have in the segment. So this is all kind of just a few things. Like I said, we could talk all day about analytics, but a few things about how you can learn from the community. And then I think we talked a little bit, but you can affect change.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the end of the day, if you can turn a naysayer into a fan, they're going to become probably one of your biggest advocates, right? So based on all of the responsiveness and actually helping these people and getting the community to engage, they're going to become fans of yours. Ultimately finding those influencers as well, finding the folks that are in your vertical that are talking about your brand and delivering valuable content to them to then reshare on Facebook or retweet. Now their circles and their fans are going to see it, and hopefully they're going to become your fans now too, and it's just going to grow organically. It's sort of like word of mouth on steroids. It's the best thing that you could possibly get.
And then I think looking at, now we're in a place where we're starting to look at social to web conversion, and I don't mean necessarily a Facebook ad conversion, because that's part of it, but not the whole picture. It's out of each tweet I put out, am I converting people to the website? Of those, how many are logged in? How many of them are not logged in? How many create a username? Where are we at within this space? And that's kind of where we're starting to see change and where we can start to encourage people. Oh, well, if you log in, you can get this piece of content. So, but they're finding out about that piece of content in Twitter because they've engaged us about something else. So we've been able to sort of change conversation, and I think you guys alluded to it really well. I just want to say on the negative sentiment, people are always really concerned about the negative. So I'll fess up, I know I'm in a room of people who probably don't like PR people as much, but I'm a PR person. I came from a PR background. And communications is what I do, it's what I love. You can actually change the entire tone of a conversation just by talking to someone. So if someone comes to your page and they say, your game's shit, well, if you say, well, I appreciate that you feel that way, but could you give us some constructive feedback? You've all of a sudden taken power away. You've affected change. You've changed the tone of a conversation. Yes, there will be people who will then go on some tirade, but it's a really small minority. Most people will say, oh, here's what I don't like. Well, it's really not that bad. And they'll start to digress from their position because a person has asked them a question about why they feel that way. So I think when you're talking about you're learning, but then you're also affecting a change and being in there right when they make that comment, and it can't be 30 minutes later because they're gone. And yeah, they might come back and look, but their anger has already been told to 30 people, and now they're over it. So it's got to be an immediate reaction. Go ahead. I'm gonna let Dan talk about the value of data.
So, in our opinion, it really, when it comes down to it, gathering the numbers is the easy part, right? There's all kinds of tools out there. We can, there's intrinsic value to it for sure, but it's a small part of it. Analyzing the data, definitely that's adding some value to it. Now you can sort of get a sense as to what the numbers mean, but at the end of the day, the real value comes in acting on it, actually doing something from those numbers. So this speaks back to what we were just talking about, acting on it and actually changing and learning. So we can help with that ultimately by taking a look at what is successful and what isn't with that data so that you can change and optimize, based on that.
And I think a big thing that, we've learned, and Keith and Tabitha talked about this too, is that, in the old model where you've got one community manager, he's like trying to tweet on a coffee break for 5 seconds, and you're not taking the time to focus on that 70%. 70% should be about change and optimizing your business and doing that deep thinking. And I think really, looking at services like what we provide really frees you up to be a strategic thinker and do the things that are going to affect change across the organization, not worry so much, did that tweet get responded to? Because those are the things that you can lose sight of in a day, and then you're stressed that the tweet didn't get responded to, but you didn't think about optimizing the business. So something to think about is, how are you structured so you can not only take in the data, learn from the data, but then actually affect change. And 70% of it should be about changing. It should be about thinking about what's next, what's coming. I mean, yes, we'd all like to have content calendars for 6 months, but having one for tomorrow could be good. Having one for next week would be great. So, really freeing yourself up to think about that. And then the last slide. So I like to call this the social media end game.
Ultimately, being able to prove ROI. ROI means numbers in terms of dollars, right? We actually need to be able to prove that social media is actually giving something to the organization that is actually tangible in terms of dollars and cents. So how you can do that is by really mapping out your e-commerce site, if that's it, or just basically anything that's a conversion in your mind that is a dollar. So that when you send a message out, you can actually track it from the message inception straight through to a conversion. I had a great meeting today actually with a client whose end game, their goal is to be able to prove that a social message has driven someone to stay on their website longer than someone who comes to the site on their own. So we're going to be able to help them with that. That's something we're driving towards.
And you have a new product coming.
Well, the product is still Hootsuite, but we're partnering. We're getting a great partnership with Adobe, allowing us to actually integrate with their Site Catalyst, or Omniture, other people know it as, so that we're going to be able to do that. We're going to be able to help you map out what a social message actually is worth at the end of the day. So throwing flags on it, basically, is what this is showing you, right? So that you can see a message came out of your system, went through a social property, and ultimately came down to a conversion at the end, and you can track all that.
And I think really, when people talk about ROI, we know the other benefits of social, right? We know reputation management. We know, understanding where you're at in the market, understanding what both the vocal minority and hopefully a larger majority think and say about you. We understand, I think, the value of that, but at the end of the day, being able to go into the C-suite and say, we can prove this makes money, is going to be, a huge benefit to getting more budgets for all of us to do social media. So I think this is the next part that's really exciting. And the exciting part is how fast. I know it seems like it's taken a long time, but truly social media is still very new. And we're getting to this place really quickly. And the other thing I just want to say on Tabitha's comment earlier is that it's not just about your social team measuring this, it's about your whole organization looking at it. It's about talking to IT and making sure everything's set up correctly to get this information. And truly I believe that social media is the thing that brings everybody back to the boardroom table. It touches every piece of an organization. There isn't a piece that's not affected by it. And I think where we got to a very siloed place in marketing, this next generation of what's going to happen through social media is going to be really exciting for all of us. So, any questions? None?
I can go down analyst too if I had a chance, right? So, all right, so we know that for, looking again at the social side of things and looking at top line analytics, right? You had it up there earlier, right? Followers, viewers, fans, that can be deceptive, right? They can be inflated, that can be falsified. And so if these people are leaving today, right, and they're going back and they're gonna be looking at their communities and looking probably at their analytic tool set, looking at how they evaluate sentiment and know how that direction is being told there. What are some things that they also should be taking into consideration outside of that number? That million is deceiving, right? Or those followers are deceiving. What are some other key things that pop up for you as an analyst that are critical in making sure that gets fit in the bucket in that journey?
I think two of the really big pieces are level of buzz, and that includes level of buzz about a brand or a game in general, but also level of buzz about certain topics. You can read a lot by just looking at how many comments are made around a certain topic, and you can see affinity by that. So for example, working with Battlefield, we've been able to see that yes, while we followed the normal trend you would expect at launch, huge peak of buzz, and then some drop off after that, we've maintained a really high, consistent level of buzz for that game in comparison to Call of Duty, which has seen a much larger drop and much more dramatic. And then we can see at different times when that peaks up. Sometimes it's because we're doing something. Sometimes we see a peak when we're doing nothing. And where it can become interesting is understanding that peak when you're doing nothing, right? What's happening now? And then we also look at individual topics, so things like patches, issues, bugs, things like that, and we start to see that they peak up. We now know about that particular community that at the end of every month they get antsy and they get increasingly negative as the end of the month comes, and almost on a dime, first of the month comes and it turns. And it's a really interesting thing to know about your community, to know like, okay, this is a trend we see over and over. It's not something to panic about. But if in the early part of the month we see a huge spike in negativity, so looking at sentiment, we know, there's something we need to look at. There's something going on here. So looking at high-level trend can actually be very insightful as long as you know how to drill in and find out. And I think that's one of the biggest tools we use.
So a quick follow-up on that. So we know that for more of the traditional marketing side of the model, you're 6-8 weeks out, right? You've been working on the community for 12 months. You're 6 weeks out, 8 weeks out, everything's starting to spike up, right? Community syncing up with media, syncing up with PR, so launches, you're hitting a crescendo, right? So let's forget that window right now.
Right.
And you mentioned something earlier about PR. So historically, we had a big conference on this about 2 years ago. We're looking at IGN and looking at gamer metrics, and GameSpot up on stage talking about the buzz metrics, and looking at their tool set, and looking at how they're managing PR. So if I'm over here on PR in managing buzz, and I'm over here on social, right, that same content isn't necessarily being dropped. Is there a way to layer those together or to manage the flow of that information of how things are building for a community?
Absolutely. I mean, I think, you should definitely be working closely with PR on what their initiatives are and where things are going to happen for them, because that's largely going to drive buzz in your community, sometimes good and sometimes bad. But I think you can absolutely marry up all your efforts as long as you kind of know what your end goals are and you know kind of what your beats are and where you're going to go. All of that can flow. I mean, from your advertising to your PR to your online to your social, all of that should have a good flow to it. All of it should be integrated. And when you look at it, you should be able to see if there's a great press article, if it's working, you should be able to see a lift in social buzz, right? And then you should be able to, in some communities, not in all, some communities don't like to be remarketed to with the great PR stuff. But in some communities, you can effectively remarket that and cause a second push.
So quick follow-up on that then. So with community and PR, and it's sometimes about reputation, right? They want to be the first to know. They want to know what's going on in your out. They're holding by for that. They're standing by for that. So is it stealing thunder from PR by launching that first in the social space? Are they offended when they learn about it from a different source than their community manager? What is the tactic when launching the content or a beat? Is it social or PR first? What do you do?
I think that's where you really have to know your consumer, and then you have to think about like what's best for them. Are they going to be mad that they heard about it over here? Some communities won't care, and it might depend on the level of the person who heard about it. If you get a small blogger with a big leak, not only is the community maybe not going to like that, but the bigger PR outlets aren't going to like it because they just got scooped. So I think it's thinking about it, but I don't think that, having your PR push maybe go a little bit earlier, I think that's pretty expected. I think that the community doesn't think they'll be the first to hear about it, but don't be long behind. I think that's one of the big things that you can see sometimes is like all this press goes out and there's a press release and, they're talking to the media and then the consumers aren't told on the social sites or on wherever they're reading about it for a week. And then they feel like, why aren't you telling me? They feel disconnected. So I think it's okay to have your PR go first, but don't be long behind with the message for your consumer. Otherwise, they're going to feel neglected.
Question back
Yeah, along that note, and you mentioned that timeliness is really important when you're engaging with whether it's negative or positive or just talking with consumers. What do you have any rules of thumb as to like what is that time? Like what's going to work and beyond what isn't going to work?
Well, I think it's as fast as humanly possible. I mean, I think attention spans are really, really short, and I think it depends on, like, you can only do so much, even with a team. I mean, we have a team of 50 people, and we can still only do so much, right? So I think you have to think, what are the things that a consumer, like if I put myself in their shoes, I want to hear back right away from. So I can't play a game, I can't use your product just made me sick. You know, something to that level where it is sort of that crisis. Like they need to hear back in minutes, not hours, definitely not days. They need to hear back in minutes from you, at least that you've heard them and that you're going to get back to them. It's okay to say, I don't know yet. You probably don't want to say it that way, but you know, it's okay to say, hey, we hear you. Let me go find out and I'll get back with you. Flag them. Hootsuite has a great set of tools where you can kind of flag someone and assign it to yourself so you can know to go back and follow up with that person, which is important, right? This is a relationship, so you do have to go back. But if they come by and they just say, hey, your game is awesome, do you need to respond to that in 2 minutes? Probably not. I think you should respond to it. I think if you can get to that in 30 minutes or an hour, or at least that day, it's very nice, but I don't think a consumer comes with the expectation you're going to respond to that. I think that's the opportunity you have to surprise and delight and be like, hey, cool, you know, thanks for stopping by. We really appreciate the feedback.
So you guys prioritize.
We do, absolutely. Yeah, and then with the tool sets, what you can do is like Hootsuite works in a column system, so you can prioritize by keywords. So you can say, I want all the at need for speed mentions that include the words can't play. And I want them in this column. And then I can see right away, and because it's got a team management function, I can see when someone's responded to it, and I know exactly how long that took. Other questions?
Cool. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, sweet
Thanks.
guys, rock and roll. Thank you so much.